Welcome to the Ecstatics. So I'd like to welcome you into this private kingdom, this inner landscape, this wonderful pilgrimage with me that we're taking together into the magical space that exists inside each one of us. And it's a monologue. This is a monologue with our own heart. All life, in a way, is a monologue with our heart. There's really only one of us talking to itself, and that's a magical thing. So as you move deeper into these ecstatics, I'd like to invite you to really create the time and space for a quietness to develop inside you, and to give yourself this space and get into a meditative, contemplative frame of mind, and then simply allow the transmission just to enter you. And I'd also like for you to allow my love for each one of these ecstatics to stir the mirror of that ecstatic inside your heart. And this is our time together, this hour, this magical time. It's only our time. There's no one else allowed in here but us, but the one. And this is the intimacy of the ecstasy. All these ecstatics are inside us. They're inside me, they're inside you, they're inside each one of us. And these are the heart lines that flow through our body, through our DNA, through our being, through history. It's all inside the DNA as memories, because there's no such thing as death, so there can be no dead. And today we're exploring a great man, the great poet Rilke, Maria Rilke. And it's simply not true to say then that Rilke is dead. Rilke was a lover of death. And we owe it to him and to all the other ecstatics and to ourselves to embrace this concept of death that we have. Because these people, these beings are alive inside our hearts. And Rilke is the first of several poets I'll be going into and looking at. So it brings us to talk a little bit about poetry, and poetry as a path towards ecstasy. The beauty of poetry is that it's a purely oral transmission. It's very close to my own heart because I'm a poet. And I love words. I've always loved words, and I've always been a poet. And poetry is where language reaches out and touches the wordless. It reaches out into the void, and it stirs the hidden currents, the emanations of the other world. And it seduces the other world into language. It captures it and it pulls it down. And in the terminology of the rainbow body, what I call sometimes the corpus Christi, poetry is where the astral body, which is our emotional body, and the mental body, our mind, begin to fuse together at a higher level. And when they're clear, and that your emotions are elevated to this higher pitch, to a higher frequency, and then the mind is clear, and then that emotional charge, that longing, can rise up through the mind and then pierce this higher plane, the plane I call the causal plane. And when words reach up into the causal plane through the causal body, a strange thing happens to them. They open up cavities in our chest, in our throat chakra, and then words take on a different level, a different meaning. They follow strange sequences. They arrange themselves in different, new, original and unusual ways, in ways that we're not used to hearing them, because they have to carry the vibration of that higher plane, the vibration of the wordless, and so they become poetic. And that's what true poetry is. Poetry has nothing to do with poems. Poetry is a frequency that exists on a causal plane. Eventually, as we go higher and higher in the frequency realm, the words become mythic. And they take on an even deeper meaning until eventually at the highest level, just before they enter the wordless, they become immortal. You know, some immortal words that we've all heard, for example, might be the words of Jesus, you know, when he said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." You know, those are immortal words when they speak directly from the heart of the truth. I wanted to give you that idea before we enter into this ecstatic state, into Rilke. What we're looking at here is that poetry is not perhaps about what many people think it is about. It's not about poems. It's about a vibration. You know, so you can speak poetically without the frame of a poem, because it's about a certain frequency that our whole being enters into as we ascend this ladder of enlightenment. You know, any enlightened being is immediately poetic. They're immediately mythic, and their words immediately become immortal. So Rilke, Rainer Maria Rilke, that was his full name. He was an Austrian poet, born in 1875. And I'll give you a little bit of context just to set the scene. He's one of the greatest of the 20th century voices who used poetry, writing, and language generally to mirror his particular search for the self. Everything about Rilke is about the search for the self. And personally, I have a connection with Rilke because I studied poetry at university, Edinburgh University. And I was a very difficult student for some of the professors because I refused to write on prose. And it really annoyed them, you know, because at university you had to answer many papers on poetry when you're doing English, and then you had to do some on prose. And it was just that I wanted to stay with the pure, you know, always wanted to stay with the pure. And poetry for me was the pure. And Rilke was one of my specialties. You know, and this is the other thing, you know, you can't study poetry. You can't study it. It's life. You know, it exists at a higher frequency. It's way beyond the mental, intellectual level. You have to let poetry pour through your cells. You know, and obviously Rilke, because he was Austrian, he wrote in German, and German is not one of the languages that I speak. So translations in English don't quite capture the essence. So you have to enter into the spirit of his being, into the fabric of his being. You know, you have to let him in and breathe him in through resonance. You know, that's how we can capture his ecstasy. So I hope through me resonating my heart and my love for Rilke that you will capture this essence. So in the year 1875, that was an amazing time. It was a great year to be born in a way, because there were so many powerful things occurring. It was actually the very year that the science of theosophy, if you can call it a science, was born. You know, and theosophy was the science of the spirit, where the Eastern teachings began to come out through the Western mind. Really interesting, through Madame Blavatsky and a lot of other people. And it was also a great time for poetry. You know, Carl Jung was born the same year, and he, as we all know, changed the way that we see ourselves through transpersonal psychology. And he really gave birth to what we now call this new age and these higher levels of mythic understanding of the psyche. Hermann Hesse, another great writer in Europe, born at the same time. There was a huge upsurge in the European culture. And in England, we had Coleridge and Wordsworth. You know, in Spain, we had Antonio Machado, another amazing mystic poet. In Ireland, around the same time, we had Yeats, who was born a little earlier. So it was this time of transformational beings coming into the world, And the British Empire was in its full swing, and it was the most powerful empire in the world, and all these trade routes were opening up. The politics were pretty liberal because everything was expanding. The slave trade was in the process of being abolished, and huge cities were beginning to form. The great cities that we know today, they were just in their inception, really, of exploding, expanding. It was a time of vast change. Must have been very intense at the turn of the 20th century. The world was being transformed. It was being transformed by the flood of new inventions, new concepts, television and radio and telephone and assembly lines and factories and suburbs and the theory of relativity, and everything was new. For the first time, everything was fresh. There was so much happening. Suddenly people could fly. Cars appeared. We could control diseases. Anything seemed possible. And all these great waves of the change were colliding with the systems of the day, social, political, economic systems. And those systems were really outmoded. And they weren't able to contain this new mutation, this new change that was coming into the world. And so everywhere there were calls for reform, for radical reform. And the old order, as old orders do, was resisting the reform fiercely. So perhaps you might, in me describing this time, it might, it sounds sort of similar to our time now, which it is similar in some sense. The time that Rilke was born at the beginning of the 20th century, it actually sets us up for where we are now. Because now we're at the beginning of the next century, where we've launched off, we've set off. And it's almost like there's this fractal, logarithmic repatterning at the beginning of each millennia. So all around the planet, there were riots. There was turmoil. There was unrest in the labor, in the people. In Russia and Mexico and China, there were full-on revolutions. Traditional beliefs were in decay, and new, more extreme ideas were being germinated. There were versions of communism and fascism already in their early stages beginning to emerge. It was a very volatile time. Unstable time. Everything was up for grabs. And then the great powers became more and more aggressive, trying to get to the top, trying to take over more and more territory, more and more land. And some of the smaller nations then were very ambitious and became opportunistic, playing for advantage. And then crisis followed crisis until the statesmen, lost the will to avoid the breakdown that was inevitable. And of course we know that this very promising time eventually collapsed into the horrendous catastrophe that was the First World War. So during this backdrop, all this time, Rilke was there. This solitary figure and a great traveller. He travelled widely. He soaked up this time. He soaked it into his cells. And what I love about him, though, is that he didn't get swallowed up in it like so many writers and poets of his time. He didn't get swallowed in the politics. He wanted to take it inside himself and alchemize it, move it beyond. And that's what he did. He was a great transitional being during a great transitional era. And everything about Rilke is change, is changing. In his travel, he went to Russia and he met Boris Pasternak. He met Tolstoy, these great writers. He lived in an artist colony. He studied with Rodin, the great sculptor. And he knew Cézanne, the artist. And he was immersed in this resurgence of art and culture and science. He studied Freud. And like the rest of us, he sought for love. He sought for love. He had affairs and, He had breakups, and he really searched for love, and he fell in love many times. Above all, though, Rainer Maria Rilke was a loner. And this is really his path. This is his path to ecstasy. You might remember in the introduction I said there are many paths to ecstasy. And one of these paths is the path of aloneness. One's relationship with oneself. The relationship with your higher self. And the question of, who am I? The question at the heart of every human being. So Rilke wasn't a hermit, but he felt alone, and he felt the joy of being alone, because he didn't really fit in anywhere. He was a complex man in a complex time, but he just didn't fit in anywhere. So his great love was silence and space and spaciousness, and this is where his ecstasy flows from. It flows out of that void, out of that everythingness. And he was one of these people who experienced the ecstatic in dips and swells. Sometimes he was deeply lonely and deeply lost, the human side of him. And other times he was given to transports of divine ecstasy. And he rose up and he found that uplift that lifts us out of the mundane and into the other world. He wrote, "What is necessary, after all, is only this: solitude, vast inner solitude. To walk inside yourself and to meet no one for hours. This is what you must be able to attain. To be solitary, as you were when you were a child, when the grown-ups walked around involved with matters that seemed large and important because they looked so busy, and because you didn't understand a thing about what they were doing." This is his creed: to walk inside yourself and meet no one for hours. That's the silence of ecstasy, that's spaciousness. And it brings me to thinking about the two great paths to the divine, the path of love and the path of meditation. What's sometimes called the path of Tantra and the path of yoga, or the path of relationship and the path of aloneness. And in the past, the masters have urged us to choose one of these paths. You have to decide one or the other. You need that commitment to take you all the way. And both paths lead to the same place, this is clear. But now we live in a different time. We live in a time of synthesis, where the left brain and the right brain come together, and the East and the West. So new combinations are possible. These paths are inside each other. So I'd urge each of us to allow our path to lead us. Through relationship, you become more alone. And through aloneness, you inhale the fragrance from meditation that allows you to love others more. So both paths are inside each other. And we're now at a time when both of these paths need more and more to be travelled as one. And there'll be those among us who are more fixed in one of the extremes. There are those among us, as an archetype, the path of relationship is, I could say, is the path of the feminine. So it has more interest to women, generally. It's more common to find that path of Tantra through the woman, the Bhakti. Then the other, the path of aloneness, has always traditionally been the path, the yang path, the yoga path. It's the path of the masculine. I don't mean men and women, I mean the masculine. The seeker rather than the surrenderer. They both lead the same way. And through this series, I will show many times how they can be fused in new ways so that we can travel all the paths as one. So I'd like to begin entering into Rilke, and I want to begin gently because he's such a profound man. I want to begin by going into his prose, despite what I just said about prose and poetry, because it's through his prose that we can access him a little. And after getting an idea of who he is, we'll be able to enter more deeply into his poetry. because it's in his poetry that you really feel the full force of his ecstasy. And there's this wonderful piece of writing, that I really recommend. And there are a series of letters that he wrote to a young man, and they're called Letters to a Young Poet. And they're wonderful letters, about 10 of them. And it's advice from an older man to a younger man. And this isn't just fiction, this is actually real advice. So this is a young man who was deeply impressed by Rilke, who wrote him letters. And Rilke took the trouble to reply to him and gave him really profound advice. So I recommend this lovely little book. It's easy to read and absolutely wonderful. In this particular one, this first letter, the young poet asks him about poetry. He's a wannabe poet. And he asks him about his poems, and this is Rilke's response. You ask whether your poems are good. You send them to publishers. You compare them with other poems. You're disturbed when certain publishers reject your attempts. Well now, since you've given me permission to advise you, I suggest that you give all that up. You're looking outward, and above all else, that you must not do now. No one can advise and help you. No one. There's only one way. Go within. Search for the cause. Find the impetus that bids you write. Put it to the test. Does it stretch out its roots in the deepest place of your heart? Can you avow that you would die if you were forbidden to write? Above all, in the most silent hour of your night, ask yourself this: must I write? And dig deep into yourself for a true answer. And if it should ring its assent, if you can confidently meet this serious question with a simple "I must," then build your life upon it. It has become your necessity. Your life, in even the most mundane and least significant hour, must then become a sign, a testimony to this urge. So this is wonderful advice, how he leads him back inside. Because as young people, we're always looking for the outside to affirm us. So Rilke gently leads him back inwards. Forget what other people think about you. Look within, dive within. This is Rilke's central message over and over again. Look within, have the courage to go within. It's very contemporary advice because we're so obsessed with the outside world. We haven't got time to look within, so it seems. But of course we have time. We have every moment in the universe. So Rilke's path is really the path of authenticity. That's his way. And he talks about that in his fourth letter to this young poet. But he who has a pact with aloneness can even now prepare the way for all this, that in the future may well be possible for many, and can build with hands less apt to err. Therefore, dear friend, embrace your solitude and love it. Endure the pain it causes and try to sing out with it. For those near to you are distant, you say. That shows it is beginning to dawn around you. There is an expanse opening up about you. And when your nearness becomes distant, then you've already expanded far, to being among the stars. Your horizon has widened greatly. Rejoice in your growth. No one can join you in that. Then he goes on to advise, and this is great advice again for everyone who's listening to this, to anyone who's on a spiritual path and that has ever had an issue with their parents. This is the advice. It's not just your parents, it's to everyone. Be good to those who stay behind, and be quiet and confident in their presence. Do not torment them with your doubts, and do not shock them with your confidence or your joy, which they cannot understand. Try to establish with them a simple, sincere, mutual feeling of communion that need not change if you yourself change. Love the life that is theirs, although different from yours. Be considerate of aging persons, for they fear the very aloneness in which you place your trust. Avoid adding substance to those dramas always unleashed between parents and children. These encounters cause the children to expend much energy and consumes the love of their elders. Even so, their love is warm and has its effect, although it does not understand. It's wonderful advice, particularly with your parents, for many of us. if they're from a different generation and they don't understand your spiritual path. This is something I found particularly with my own father, that he doesn't speak the same language as me, and yet when I let go of him needing to, this was in my 20s, I discovered something magical. I discovered that one of my father's great passions is gardening, and he knows all the Latin names, for example, of every plant, that you could ever imagine. And his great thing then is to walk around the garden and look at his flowers and plants. And when I realized one day this is one of his main loves, I just went round the garden one time with him, and he was telling me all these Latin names and pointing out all these things growing here and there, and this tree was dying and that one was there. Yeah, I kind of realized that he was kind of sharing his love, and that I was just absorbing it and listening. And if I met him on his terms like that, it was a beautiful thing. And it didn't require any more of him. I still don't require any more of him. That's his way of loving. It's a great, great lesson it was for me. And I hope it is for all of us as children, towards our parents and towards anyone that, that doesn't fully understand your particular style and language. The other thing Rilke really talks about, and his other great teaching, is patience. Patience. And how to look at your life as though it's a work of art. Remember, he was surrounded by art and culture, so he took his own life as the art. Always trust yourself and your own feeling, as opposed to argumentations, discussions, or introductions of that sort. If it turns out that you're wrong, then the natural growth of your inner life will eventually guide you to other insights. Allow your judgments their own silent, undisturbed development, which, like all progress, must come from deep within and cannot be forced or hastened. Everything is gestation and then birthing. To let each impression and each embryo of a feeling to come to completion entirely in itself, in the dark, in the unsayable, the unconscious, beyond the reach of one's own understanding, and with deep humility and patience to wait for the hour when a new clarity is born. This alone is what it means to live as an artist, in understanding as in creating. In this there is no measuring with time. A year doesn't matter, and 10 years are nothing. Being an artist means not numbering and counting, but ripening like a tree, which doesn't force its sap and stands confidently in the storms of spring, not afraid that afterwards summer may not come. And it does come, but it comes only to those who are patient, who are there as if eternity lay before them, so unconcernedly silent and vast. I learn it every day of my life. I learn it with pain I am grateful for. Patience is everything. He understands this, Rilke, that this is the secret to ecstasy. Patience. You can't chase ecstasy. It comes when it comes. It comes after understanding. And understanding is of the full being. You have to be there as if eternity lay before you. It's a beautiful teaching. So, shall we dive into the poetry? There's so much beauty in his poetry. I'll give you some of the greatest, what I think are the greatest snippets. And I want you to know that once you enter into the field of his poetry, it's like we're in hallowed ground. It's like we're inside the field of ecstasy, and I hope you feel that. In English, the best translation is by a man called Stephen Mitchell. The only translator for me is Stephen Mitchell. I personally wouldn't bother with anyone else. I've looked at different translations of Rilke, and this is my advice. And I apologize to all the other people, But Stephen Mitchell, he's a master. He's done the world a great service. He knows the mystical inside himself because he's not an intellectual. This man has written and entered into deep, deep truths inside himself. So if we're going to get into Rilke in English, and if you buy any Rilke, make sure it's translated by Stephen Mitchell. It's also been said that Rilke is not poetry that can be read in a thoughtful way, in an intellectual way. and that he induces a kind of trance. And there's nothing like his greatest works, the Duino elegies, to do this. You know, the Duino elegies are the main corpus of his poetry. He's written an enormous amount of poetry. But these are really the pillars, the 10 great pillars upon which all his poetry stands, and they are hypnotic. They're an argument against ordinariness. They're an intimate call to the beyond. The central core is love and death. It's deep, deep stuff. And because they're so hypnotic and they're so powerful, like pieces of music, you know, I would recommend, if you can, to go online and listen to some of them in German, you know, and, you know, because when you hear them in German, you hear the timbre of the poetry in its raw form. And German is such a sensuous, unctuous, rich, decadent, kind of mad language. It's a language in which ecstasy can be, actually. It almost drools from your mouth, you know, so I really hope you explore this and you can get this feeling. You know, and I, of course, will read them in English so that we can enter into them in both ways. You know, so these mighty poems, the Duino elegies, start with the first elegy. You know, I'm going to read you about this. It's so powerful, it speaks for itself. You know, the very first paragraph, I think it says everything. Who, if I cried out, would hear me among the angels' hierarchies? And even if one of them pressed me suddenly against his heart, I would be consumed in that overwhelming existence. For beauty is nothing but the beginning of terror, which we are still just able to endure. And we are so awed because it serenely disdains to annihilate us. Every angel is terrifying. That is Rilke. It is the annihilation of the self into bliss. And the honesty of that, it's terrifying to the self. You know, one of the themes he talks about a lot, and here it is in the first elegy, is night. He loves the night. Oh, and night, there is night, when a wind full of infinite space gnaws at our faces. Whom would it not remain for, that longed-after, mildly disillusioning presence, which the solitary heart so painfully meets? Is it any less difficult for lovers? But they keep on using each other to hide their own fate. Don't you know yet? Fling the emptiness out of your arms into the spaces we breathe. Perhaps the birds will feel the expanded air with more passionate flying. Yes, the springtimes needed you. Often a star was waiting for you to notice it. A wave rolled toward you out of the distant past, or as you walked under an open window, a violin yielded itself to your hearing. All this was mission. That's such a powerful sentence. All this was mission. Everything is waiting for everything else. Everything is interconnected. How the violin yields itself to your hearing. How the star calls you to notice it. You know, I love how he connects objects to humans through consciousness. It's very quantum. You know, and the second elegy, the second Duino elegy, is very, very powerful. One of my favorites. Every angel is terrifying. And yet, alas, I invoke you, almost deadly birds of the soul, knowing about you. Where are the days of Tobias, when one of you, veiling his radiance, stood at the front door, slightly disguised for the journey, no longer appalling, a young man like the one who curiously peeked through the window? But if the archangel now, peerless, from behind the stars, took even one step down towards us, our own heart, beating higher and higher, would beat us to death. Who are you? Early successes, creation's pampered favourites, mountain ranges, peaks growing red in the dawn of all beginning, pollen of the flowering Godhead, joints of pure light, corridors, stairways, thrones, space formed from essence, shields made of ecstasy, storms of emotion whirled into rapture, and suddenly alone mirrors, which scoop up the beauty that has streamed from their face and gather it back into themselves entire. But we, when moved by deep feeling, evaporate. We breathe ourselves out and away. From moment to moment our emotion grows fainter like a perfume. Though someone may tell us, yes, you've entered my bloodstream, the room, the whole springtime is filled with you, what does it matter? He can't contain us. We vanish inside him and around him. And those who are beautiful, oh, who can retain them? Appearance ceaselessly rises in their face and is gone, like dew from the morning grass. What is ours floats into the air like steam from a dish of hot food. Oh, smile, where are you going? Oh, upturned glance, new warm receding wave on the sea of the heart. Alas, but that is what we are. Does the infinite space we dissolve into taste of us, then? Do the angels really reabsorb only the radiance that streamed out from themselves? Or sometimes, as if by an oversight, is there a trace of our essence in it as well? Rilke is consumed by this idea of the angel throughout these elegies. They're addressed to the angel. You know, he fumes at the angel because the angel obviously represents the divine, something ungraspable one high above. That's what he calls it. Ungraspable. It's the transcendent. It's what his whole being is reaching towards, yearning for. It's what the aloneness is taking him into, deeper and deeper inside, reaching. His words are always reaching. They're reaching into this causal plane, trying to reach, but they can't quite capture the void. And the seventh elegy. Not wooing, no longer shall wooing, voice that has outgrown it, be the nature of your cry. But instead you would cry out as purely as a bird, when the quickly ascending season lifts him up, nearly forgetting that he is a suffering creature and not just a single heart being flung into brightness, into the intimate skies. Just like him, you would be wooing, not any less purely, so that still unseen she would sense you, the silent lover in whom a reply slowly awakens, and as she hears you grows warm, the ardent companion to your own most daring emotion. Oh, and springtime would hold it everywhere. It would echo the song of Annunciation. First, the small, questioning notes, intensified all around by the sheltering silence of a pure, affirmative day. Then up the stairs, up the stairway of calls to the dreamed-of temple of the future. And then the trill, like a fountain which in its rising jet already anticipates its fall in a game of promises. And still ahead, summer. Not only all the dawns of summer, not only how they change themselves into day and shine with beginning, not only the days so tender around flowers and above around the patterned treetops, so strong, so intense, not only the reverence of all these unfolded powers, not only the pathways, not only the meadows at sunset, not only, after a late storm, the deep breathing freshness, not only approaching sleep and a premonition, but also the nights, but also the lofty summer nights, and the stars as well, the stars of the earth. Oh, to be dead at last and know them endlessly, all the stars, for how could we ever forget them? Can you feel the yearning, the ache? You know, and he goes on in the same elegy. It's such a beautiful energy. Truly being here is glorious. Even you knew it, your girls who seem to be lost, to go under, in the filthiest streets of the city, festering there, or wide open for garbage. For each of you had an hour, or perhaps not even an hour, a barely measurable time between two moments when you were granted a sense of being. Everything, your veins flowed with being. So there he captures it, within. It's the withinness, it's the insideness, it's the beingness. Everyone knows it. The man on the street, the woman, the prostitute, the child, everyone. The lowliest to the highest. It's inside each of us. And we've all had those moments. We all know life in its purity. So this is Rilke at his profoundest. It's raining here outside. Poets love the rain. A lot of Rilke's poetry, as a product of his time and his education, is based on mythology and the mythic archetypes, these great mythic archetypes. And many poets write within this realm of the myths because you can't really speak your heart without involving the myths and the mythic figures and the classical figures in his case. And in Rilke's education, the classical figures are of huge importance. One of the most powerful and important figures in his inner being, and I guess in a way in mine too, is the figure of Orpheus. Orpheus and Hermes. Orpheus, Greek, is a great archetype of poetry and music. He's the secret of the poetic. He contains poetry as an archetype. He was the perfecter of Hermes' lyre. He built this lyre, this 7-stringed instrument, this, the 7 subtle bodies, the 7 colors of the rainbow, the 7 days of the week. It's all space and time and light. The tones, the qualities, the language, sound and frequency. This is the realm of Orpheus, the realm of poetry. He's a kind of character like Merlin from Celtic mythology. He's a magician. He's a bardic magician. He's a wizard of music, of the subtle energies and the power of music to transform and to hypnotize and to awaken. He's a mythic fractal being. And Rilke wrote 55 sonnets to Orpheus. 55, mystic number. And they're beautiful. And he wrote them so fast, in about 3 days. The whole lot. Jang, bang, bang, bang them out. It's like they just poured through him in a rush of awakening. I may read some. They're short, but they're potent. But one of his greatest poems, to me, I think, is called Orpheus and Eurydice. And it's the story of Orpheus. What happens with Orpheus is that he was in love with Eurydice, his beloved. And his beloved Eurydice was bitten by snakes. This has deeper meanings. She was dying. And she goes down into the underworld. So Orpheus, he descends into the underworld to ask for his beloved Eurydice to have her back. And he takes with him his lyre and he plays his soft, beautiful music to Hades, the god of the underworld. And his music soothes Hades. And Hades is seduced and enchanted by the lyre of Orpheus. He's so enchanted that he strikes a deal with him. He says, okay, you can have her back, but you must leave now, and she will follow you, and I'll send her out with my messenger Hermes. But the deal is, you mustn't look back. If you doubt she's behind you, you mustn't look back. If you look back, you can't have her. And of course, being a myth, Orpheus gets almost all the way to the top, and then he looks back. And so Eurydice turns and she goes back down into Hades, and they are forever parted. And Rilke sees this tragedy as a great story. He sees this as a profoundly happy story, actually. And I love that about him, because he really transmutes it into its deeper mythical meaning. So there's heavy rain now. I'm just going to read on because you may hear it in the background. I'm going to allow it to frame this story. So I'm going to read the whole poem because it's so powerful. And I just ask you to stay with me in the process and just allow yourself to go into the music of the poetry itself and let the images fall into you and just come alive and play inside you. And you might like to close your eyes and just lie down and just allow it to soak through you. I'll talk a little about it afterwards, about its true meaning. The poem's called Orpheus, Eurydice, Hermes. That was the deep, uncanny mine of souls. Like veins of silver ore, they silently moved through its massive darkness. Blood welled up among the roots on its way to the world of men, and in the dark it looked as hard as stone. Nothing else was red. There were cliffs there, and forests made of mist. There were bridges spanning the void, and that great grey, blind lake which hung above its distant bottom like the sky on a rainy day above a landscape. And through the gentle, unresisting meadows, one pale path unrolled like a strip of cotton. Down this path they were coming. In front, the slender man in the blue cloak, mute, impatient, looking straight ahead. In large, greedy, unchewed bites, his walk devoured the path. His hands hung at his sides, tight and heavy, out of the falling folds, no longer conscious of the delicate lyre which had grown into his left arm, like a slip of roses grafted onto an olive tree. His senses felt as though they were split in two. His sight would race ahead of him like a dog, stop, come back, then rushing off again, would stand impatient at the path's next turn. But his hearing, like an odour, stayed behind. Sometimes it seemed to him as though it reached back to the footsteps of those other two who were to follow him up the long path home. But then once more it was just his own steps' echo, or the wind inside his cloak that made the sound. He said to himself they had to be behind him, said it loud and heard it fade away. They had to be behind him, but their steps were ominously soft. If only he could turn around just once, but looking back would ruin this entire work so near completion. Then he could not fail to see them, those other two who followed him so softly. The god of speed and distant messages, a traveller's hood above his shining eyes, his slender staff held out in front of him, and his little wings fluttering at his ankles, and on his left arm, barely touching it, she. A woman so loved that from one lyre there came more lament than from all lamenting women, that a whole world of lament arose, in which all nature reappeared. Forest and valley, road and village, field and stream and animal, and that around this lament world, even as around the other earth, a sun revolved, and a silent star-filled heaven, a lament heaven, with its own disfigured stars, so greatly was she loved. But now she walked beside the graceful god, her steps constricted by the trailing grave clothes. Uncertain, gentle, and without impatience. She was deep within herself, like a woman heavy with child, and did not see the man in front, or the path ascending steeply into life. Deep within herself. Being dead filled her beyond fulfillment. Like a fruit suffused with its own mystery and sweetness, she was filled with her vast death, which was so new she could not understand that it had happened. She had come into a new virginity and was untouchable. Her sex had closed like a young flower at nightfall, and her hands had grown so unused to marriage that the god's infinitely gentle touch of guidance hurt her like an undesired kiss. She was no longer that woman with blue eyes who once had echoed through the poet's songs, no longer the wide couch's scent and island, and that man's property no longer. She was already loosened like long hair, poured out like fallen rain, shared like a limitless supply. She was already root. And when, abruptly, the god put out his hand to stop her, saying, with sorrow in his voice, "He has turned around," she could not understand, and softly answered, "Who?" Far away, dark before the shining exit gates, someone or other stood, whose features were unrecognizable. He stood and saw how, on the strip of road among the meadows, with a mournful look, the god of messages silently turned to follow the small figure, already walking back along the path, her steps constricted by the trailing grave clothes, uncertain, gentle, and without impatience. Rilke knows the divine feminine. You know, this man knows what it means to be dead, mystically. His love of the night, of lovers, of death, of the wind, of all the feminine aspects that he writes about. It's so deep inside him, this aloneness, this void. You know, when he was young, his mother dressed him as a little girl. You know, that's why his middle name is Maria, because his mother wanted a little girl. It's a sort of famous sub-myth of Rilke that he was dressed as a little girl. You know, and he's saturated in this femininity. You see, as the masculine goes into the aloneness, it finds the feminine. It finds the allness, the everythingness, the void. And that's his lover. That is his beloved. You know, the ecstasy is contained within that embrace. It's really there. I think I just allow the poem just to be. You know, he touches on this in another great poem about Buddha. It's called Buddha in Glory. It's a short one. Center of centers, core of cores, almond self-enclosed and growing sweet. All this universe to the furthest stars, all beyond them, is your flesh, your fruit. Now you feel how nothing clings to you. Your vast shell reaches into endless space. And there the rich, thick fluids rise and flow, illuminated in your infinite peace. A billion stars go spinning through the night, blazing high above your head. But in you is the presence that will be when all the stars are dead. It's his poem to the Buddha. It's a good poem. Not one of his greatest, because it doesn't have that Rilke depth. You know, it's more a mental plane poem than a causal plane. But it shows that at an intellectual level that he had understood this as well. He understood his quest. You know, I don't know at what level to keep laying this on you, but to me, his best poem, the best ever poem, perhaps one of the best poems ever written. It's one of his most famous. I find it very difficult to read without choking. It's very short, called The Panther. It's universal. The Panther. His vision from the constantly passing bars has grown so weary that it cannot hold anything else. It seems to him there are 1,000 bars, and behind the bars no world. As he paces in cramped circles over and over, the movement of his powerful, soft strides is like a ritual dance around a center in which a mighty will stands paralyzed. Only at times the curtain of your pupils lifts quietly, an image enters in, rushes down through the tensed, arrested muscles, plunges into the heart, and is gone. It's truly a heartbreaking poem. It was written after he'd seen a panther in the zoo in Paris where he lived, a caged panther. You know, the cage and the panthers is the wound, it's the sacred wound. You see that cage, those bars, those constantly passing bars. You know, if you've ever seen a wild animal in a zoo, a great animal, they pace backwards and forwards, round and round and round. It seems to him there are 1,000 bars, and behind the bars no world. It's the heart. You know, those bars, those are the rib cage. You know, and that's the wound, this deep, deep wound out of which the ecstasy finally emerges. And so the path of aloneness is the path deep into the wound. And Rilke is a man that lives fully within it. And he allows itself to be transformed inside him. Remember, he was born the same time as Jung. And Jung brought this transmission of alchemy, psychological alchemy, and deeper other levels of alchemy. This is all alchemical. You know, and he was a transitionary being, Rilke. He speaks in a way of our time now. You know, he knew about this divine feminine coming into the world. He knew what was coming. You know, it was coming. It was seeded in his time, you know, and he senses himself as a bridge. And he urges us to keep our hearts open. You know, he kept his heart open amidst the pain, amidst the war, the First World War. So his gift to us is his totality. In the West, you know, at that time, there were no real masters. Well, maybe one or two. You know, there were a few, but they were rare. Because we don't have the tradition that the East has. We have the religions, we have Christianity and Catholicism, but we don't have the tradition of the enlightened master. So Rilke trod this wild path. It takes courage. It took even greater courage then. You know, he's been a pathfinder for us, for our generation. We owe him and his generation of the ecstatics. You know, we owe them all. You know, and his message for us is not to become too comfortable. You know, right now we're so comfortable. Well, you know, we're being shown now the limits of our comfort. You know, everything in the world has become so comfortable and easy, but we shouldn't be. That's what Rilke is saying. We shouldn't be. If you're going to go into the time you're born in, if you're going to really transform it, you have to feel the wound. You have to feel the deadening of the day. You have to feel this deadening, for example, that technology brings. You know, that all these, that our modern world brings us, a deadening, a distraction. I mean, of course, they can bring us great light, but it also brings us this comfort and this deadening. And Rilke is not dead. You know, wherever you see a bird cutting through the sky, Rilke has put himself in that bird. He's the wind, he's the darkness, he's in every woman's heart. And if you're a man listening to this, speak your heart to a woman. Speak it. Cross the street and tell her she's beautiful, you know? I used to have a friend like that, you know? Wild friend who used to cross the street and tell strangers they were beautiful. You know, it's like allowing the poetry to stir inside us, the ecstatic to come alive, you know. And we live in the time of a great renaissance, and it began with Rilke. You know, the ancient powers in the earth are awakening through us again, and Rilke anticipated this, all of this. He knew that this was coming. He knew this awakening, this global awakening was coming. He sensed it, that ecstasy is everywhere. He discovered that. He reached out with his subtle bodies to the hidden. He reached out with his words to the hidden, to the inner nature inside everything. And we are now called to do the same. We have to awaken our dormant powers, these siddhis that are inside us. And we have to use them to transform the matter of this world back into light. You know, Rilke's poetry, his life, it dips and swells like music. His life is the story of a man who struggles and wrestles like Jacob with an angel. He's wrestling with this angel, with this supernatural being inside him, this siddhi being. Every now and then he hits the core and bang, that angel floods into him. You know, the presence of that angel floods into him. Suddenly he is the angel. Suddenly he's no longer with the needs for the symbol or the word or even the poem. He catches it. He catches it in moments. It's there particularly in the 9th elegy, the most famous. It's where his words have become immortal. It's where they've gone up, like I said, beyond the mythic, and they've touched the immortal plane. Here are some of these immortal words as we come to a close. Earth, isn't this what you want to arise within us, invisible? Isn't it your dream to be wholly invisible someday? Oh, earth invisible! What if not transformation is your urgent command? Earth, my dearest, I will. Oh, believe me, you no longer need your springtimes to win me over. One of them, even one, is already too much for my blood. Unspeakably I have belonged to you from the first. You were always right, and your holiest inspiration is our intimate companion, death. Look, I am living on what? Neither childhood nor future grows any smaller. Superabundant being wells up in my heart. Superabundant being wells up in my heart. Immortal words. What's this all really been about? Rilke, his poetry, his insights, his depth. Well, part of this journey through the ecstatics, I began with the Mother Julian, and her revelation that we are held in this embrace of the feminine, the divine feminine, and that whatever we do, it's there holding us up so that we can't do anything wrong. Whatever we do, immediately it falls into forgiveness because we are that thing, we are the divine. And here Rilke surrenders to it. He moves that impulse into another area. His is kind of an urgent voice as well. He's saying to us, all of us alive now, he's saying, look, there's an urgency to your awakening. It's not that the earth even needs it, but the earth is the urgency. The awakening is urgent, it's imminent. And not to get too comfortable, because comfort and distraction in the modern world are so easy to fall into, and we're so distracted from the inner. So he drives us back inside the heart, back inside the wound. Purify, transform, go in. Every time you allow yourself to be distracted by the smallest thing, whatever it is, the TV, the telephone, the whatever, the relationship, anything, Rilke says it's all inside. That's his testament. Pull it back inside you. Pull back the blame. Pull back the pain inside you. Transform it. Purify it. These siddhis, these ecstasies are hiding inside that. That panther is waiting to be released from that cage, and you've got to go into the cage and be the panther. You've got to be the panther so completely. But you can't be distracted. And he also says something very profound, I think, about relationships. His message is that the relationship takes you beyond the relationship. If it's a true relationship, then you no longer need the relationship. And that's something always to be borne in mind. That's inside all of us. That the relationship is simply the beloved. That we are afraid of our own aloneness. That's what Rilke is saying. Every angel is terrifying. That's how he begins the elegies. It's like you have to go into that deep fear of your own aloneness, of the void. That fear that it will kill you, that you will die in it. And of course, you'll die in it. And you'll be reborn as a greater you, as an angel, as a transcendent being. So his core teaching is about aloneness and the beauty that lies in aloneness. But even the word aloneness, really what it means is all oneness. So his teaching is about communion. So I hope that you've imbibed Rilke's strength and his courage from this monologue, and that it can feed into your own aloneness, and that you can sing out with that aloneness and embrace infinity with it, and take in some of that poetic, heavenly Shakti that Rilke loved so much. A deep thank you from me, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Blessings.